When we think of the War of the Ring, our minds immediately go to the Pelennor Fields or the Black Gate. We see the Witch King descending on Snowmane, we hear the thunderous horns of the Rohirrim, we see the literal and metaphorical return of the king. It's the climax of cinema, a masterpiece of storytelling. But if you were to look at the map of Middle-earth on March 15th, 3019 in the Third Age, you would realize that the Siege of Gondor was only one part of a much larger and much more terrifying global conflict. The war wasn't a localized skirmish at the gates of a single city. It was a continental convulsion that stretched from the sun-scorched wastes of the south to the frozen northern heights of the Grey Mountains. You see, Sauron was not just a Dark Lord, he was a master strategist, a logistical genius who viewed the world as a chessboard of attrition. He knew that if he focused solely on Minas Tirith, then the Elves of Lothlorien, the Dwarves of Erebor, and the Men of Dale could unite their disparate strengths and strike him from behind, cutting his supply lines and severing his connection to the north. And Sauron had no intention of letting that happen. While Aragorn and Gandalf were making their stand in the south, an entire northern war was unfolding. A series of desperate, bloody battles involving characters that you know and love, yet whose struggles were relegated to the appendices of the books. These were not mere skirmishes, they were total wars for survival that decided the fate of entire civilizations, while the world's attention was fixed on the white walls of Minas Tirith and the Black Gate of Mordor. So today, we're gonna do something that I've wanted to do for a long time. We're moving the camera away from the Fellowship and the familiar drama of the Ring Quest, and we're going to look at the battles that Peter Jackson and Tolkien left out of the main narrative. These are the forgotten conflicts of the War of the Ring, the battles that, had they been lost, would have ensured that even if the ring had been destroyed, there would have been little to no Middle-earth left. We are talking about a scenario where the Fourth Age begins not with a coronation, but with a silent, ash-covered wasteland in the north. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to Factor Fantasy. If you're new here and you enjoy videos about Tolkien and the world he created, then consider subscribing. Also, shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, and the rest of my incredible YouTube and Patreon members who help make these videos possible. And a special shout out to our newest member, Ellis. Now, before we get into the tactical details, we have to understand why these battles happened. Sauron's strategy was simple: isolation. He sought to create a world of disconnected islands of resistance that he could drown one by one. He knew if everybody ganged up together, he might not stand a chance. If he could pin Thranduil in Mirkwood, keep Galadriel trapped in Lorien, and wipe out the line of Dale at Erebor, then the North would collapse like a house of cards. In Tolkien's books, and specifically The Tale of Years, which is in the appendices of The Return of the King, we see that Sauron had spent decades preparing his northern forces. He wasn't just breeding orcs in Mordor, he was cultivating deep, transactional alliances with the new host of Easterlings from Rhûn. These people saw Sauron not as a monster, but as a god king who promised them the fertile lands of the west in exchange for their blood. Then he also had a secondary base of operations in Dol Guldur. This fortress, which we saw in The Hobbit, remained a massive, festering thorn in the side of the Free Peoples. It sat right in the heart of Mirkwood, acting as a staging ground for three separate, massive armies that could strike in three different directions simultaneously. If these northern realms had fallen, the Easterlings would have swept down the Anduin like a tide of steel. They would have joined the siege of Minas Tirith with fresh, rested legions, likely arriving just as the Rohirrim began their charge. The forgotten battles weren't just side quests. They were the defensive line that kept the world from being completely engulfed by a darkness that would have rendered the destruction of the ring a costly victory. So, our first stop is the Kingdom Under the Mountain. Most people assume that after the Battle of the Five Armies, the Dwarves and the Men of Dale lived in a state of happily ever after, rebuilding their homes in peace. But Tolkien's writings tell us a much grimmer story of a peace bought with constant vigilance. By March of 3019, King Brand, the grandson of Bard the Bowman, was ruling in Dale, overseeing a prosperous but precarious kingdom. Beside him, in the Lonely Mountain, sat King Dain Ironfoot. If you recall from the books, Dain took over after Thorin's death, as he was the next in line to be king under the mountain. And by the time the War of the Ring rolled around, Dain was 252 years old. In the biology of Tolkien's dwarves, age 240 is often the turning point where they rapidly become whitebeards, and Dain was exactly that, a venerable, white-bearded king of the Old World. Though his hair had turned, his spirit had not. He He still carried his legendary red axe, a weapon that had tasted the blood of orc-kind since the Battle of Azanulbazar. And the invasion from Sauron began much earlier than many realize. On March 14th, the very same day that the shadow reached Minas Tirith in the south, the Easterlings crossed the River Carnan. This forced King Brand to begin a fighting retreat toward Dale. Now remember, unlike the Hobbit movies which showed Dale being right next to the Lonely Mountain, they actually were quite far from each other. You couldn't just simply run over in 10 minutes. So by the time the main engagement began on March 17th, it was a brutal, exhausting conflict fought in the narrow valleys and ruins in the shadow of the mountain. King Brand and King Dain led their people together, an alliance forged in the fires of Smaug's death many decades prior. But the Easterlings were a sea of humanity that seemed to have no end. Under the weight of overwhelming numbers, the lines of men finally broke. King Brand was slain at the feet of the mountain, falling as a king should, defending his people's last retreat. And here's the detail from the books that defines the dwarven character. King Dain Ironfoot did not immediately retreat behind his stone gates when the line of men collapsed. As the battle turned into a desperate withdrawal, Dain stood his ground over the body of his fallen friend, King Brand. In the chaos of the retreat before the gate of Erebor, this ancient Whitebeard held the line, wielding the red axe with the strength of his youth until the darkness fell and he was finally overwhelmed. It is one of the most heroic deaths in the entire legendarium, a king of the dwarves falling in the mud and blood to protect the body of a king of men. With their leaders dead, the survivors retreated into Erebor and shut the great gates. For 10 days, as the ring neared the fire, the Easterlings besieged the Lonely Mountain. From March 17th to March 27th, the men and dwarves were trapped within the stone. The Easterlings couldn't break the gate, thankfully. The craft of the dwarves was too strong for that. But they didn't need to. They were content to starve them out, knowing that time was one of the things the free peoples did not have. Or at least that's what they thought. The only reason the siege ended was because news had reached the north on March 27th that the ring had been destroyed and the Dark Tower had fallen. Imagine the confusion of the Easterlings. One moment they are winning, their victory inevitable, the next their god is dead, and a spiritual vacuum has sucked the heart out of their host. Bard II and Thorin III Stonehelm, the sons of the fallen kings, saw the hesitation in the enemy lines and charged out of the mountain in a desperate final attempt to rout the invaders. But make no mistake, the north was only saved because of the brave stand of King Dain and King Brand that held the gate until the very last moment. Now let's move west to the Golden Wood. In the films, we see Lorien as a place of peace, a sanctuary where the Fellowship finds rest and poetic reflection. But after they leave, that sanctuary becomes a fortress under siege, a target for Sauron's most focused hatred. Sauron hated Galadriel above almost all others in Middle-earth. She was one of the few beings who could look into his mind and perceive his thoughts, a leftover from the First Age who remembered what the world was before the Dark Lord. He knew that she held one of the 3 elven rings, and he sent 3 separate waves of orcs and trolls from Dol Guldur to destroy her realm. These attacks happened on March 11th, March 15th, and March 22nd. Tolkien is very specific about why Lorien didn't fall. He tells us in the appendices that the valor of the elves was great, but there was a more important reason. The power that dwelt there was too great for any to overcome unless Sauron had come there himself. Through Nenya, the Ring of Adamant, Galadriel wielded a power of preservation and concealment. It was a spiritual shielding that pushed back the shadow and confused the minds of the invaders, making the woods themselves a labyrinth of bewilderment. However, the book notes that grievous harm was done to the fair woods on the borders. The orcs, frustrated by the invisible barrier that they could not cross, used fire. They tried to burn the elven home to the ground, turning the borders of the wood into a charred, blackened rim. Imagine that scene. The golden wood, usually shimmering with the light of the stars and the timeless grace of the Malorn trees, was now clouded by thick, oily black smoke of orc fires. Elven archers, led by Celeborn, were forced into desperate guerrilla war in the trees, picking off invaders who tried to cross the Anduin. It wasn't a clean, magical victory just because of Galadriel and her ring. It was a gritty, terrifying defense of the last remnants of the Elder Days. If Lorien had fallen, the Anduin would have been completely open. The forces of Dol Guldur would have sailed south to join the forces of Mordor at the Pelennor Fields. Galadriel was the only thing standing between the northern orcs and the vulnerable open lands of Rohan, which were already being bled dry by Saruman's Uruk-hai. But while Galadriel was defending Lorien, her kin in the north were fighting a parallel war for their own survival. This is the realm of King Thranduil, Legolas's father. On March 15th, the very same day that the Battle of the Pelennor Fields was raging in the south, Thranduil's realm was invaded by a second massive army from Dol Guldur. Tolkien calls this the Battle Under the Trees, a name that evokes the claustrophobic and terrifying nature of the conflict. This wasn't a battle fought in open fields with shining armor and banners waving in the wind. This was a long battle fought in the dark and shifting heart of Mirkwood. There were no lines, no formations, it was ambush after ambush, fought in a forest that was literally catching fire around them. Tolkien writes that there was a great ruin of fire in the woods, a heartbreaking consequence for a people who loved the growing things of the world above all else. Think about Thranduil for a second. In The Hobbit, he's often portrayed as cold, isolationist, and perhaps even a bit selfish, concerned only about his white gems and his wine. But in The War of the Ring, he is a frontline general. He led his people into the burning woods to protect the north, fighting alongside them in the smoke and the shadows. He didn't have a ring of power like Galadriel or Elrond to help him hold back the tide. He only had the skill of his people, his own centuries of combat experience, and a grim determination not to let his forest be consumed. In the end, Thranduil had the victory, driving the orcs back toward the south, but the cost was immense. Much of the northern forest was scorched beyond recognition. When the war finally ended, Thranduil and Celeborn met in the middle of the woods on April 6th, the Elven New Year. They officially renamed the forest Erin Lascalen, the Wood of Green Leaves, signaling a rebirth and a new age. They cleansed it of the name Mirkwood, but it was a victory bought with the blood of many elves who never got a mention in the primary narrative of the Fellowship. Their sacrifices were the silent foundation upon which the peace of the Fourth Age was built. This leads us to perhaps the most epic moment that was never filmed, a moment of catharsis that would have been a visual masterpiece. After the ring was destroyed on March 25th, the war did not instantly end. The remaining orcs in Dol Guldur, though leaderless and broken in spirit, were still a threat to anyone who ventured near. So, on March 28th, Celeborn led the host of Lorien across the river Anduin. They landed their boats on the eastern shore and marched on the hill of Amanlanc, the site of Dol Guldur. This was the final cleanup of the Shadow in the north, a systematic purging of the enemy's last stronghold. And here's the book's detail that every fan needs to know. Tolkien writes, "They took Dol Guldur, and Galadriel threw down its walls and laid bare its pits, and the forest was cleansed." Let that sink in for a moment. Galadriel didn't just walk in and claim the fortress, she threw down the walls. This is Galadriel at the height of her power, no longer constrained by the need to hide her ring, no longer waiting for the shadow to pass. She personally dismantled the dark fortress, stone by stone, through her own inherent power. She revealed the pits, the torture chambers, the dark experiments of the necromancer, and the centuries of accumulated filth, and she used her power to wash the evil away. This wasn't just a military victory, it was an exorcism of a land that had been haunted for 1,000 years. It was the moment the North finally got to breathe again. So why did I want to tell you about these battles? Why did I spend this much time talking about events that aren't even in the movies? It's because of Tolkien's core philosophy. In the world of Middle-earth, the small things matter. We see that with Frodo and Sam, two hobbits in the middle of a wasteland. But we also see it in the fact that the world is a tapestry where every thread is connected. The victory at the Black Gate would have been hollow if, upon returning home, the king found the north in ruins, the dwarves extinct, and the elven forest burned to ash. The world needed to be saved as a whole, not just in pieces. These forgotten battles show us the scale of the sacrifice that was required to win the peace. They remind us that while our heroes were doing the impossible, thousands of others were doing the ordinary hard work of defending their homes. King Dain Ironfoot, standing as a whitebeard of 252 years over the body of his friend, is just as much a hero of the War of the Ring as Aragorn is. Thranduil, fighting through a forest fire to save his people, is just as vital as Theoden. Their stories are the connective tissue of the Legendarium, proving that the struggle against darkness was a universal burden. When we overlook these battles, we overlook the completeness of Tolkien's world. He didn't just write a story about a ring, he wrote the history of a world. And in that history, every gate held, every fortress defended, and every wall thrown down contributed to the dawn of the Fourth Age. But what do you think? If you could see one of these battles adapted to the screen, which would it be? For me, it's gotta be Mirkwood and Lothlorien. I'd love to see the elves defending their own northern kingdoms and then meeting up afterwards to create a new bond and a new age. Plus, watching Galadriel throw down the walls of Dol Guldur simply by raising her arms and singing at it would be pretty cool. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe and share with a Tolkien-loving friend. Also, there's plenty of playlists on my channel containing videos with more Tolkien lore that you can binge watch right now. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.